Surviving Kristallnacht. 75 years ago this month, the Nazis attacked Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues, unleashing a wave of terror across Europe. Important words to know. Nazi, a member of a political party dedicated to German dominance of Europe and the destruction of the Jews. Holocaust, the mass extermination of Jews and others by the Nazis from 1933 to 1945, and concentration camp, a prison or place of forced labor, often a general term that includes death camps where millions of people were killed. Susan Strauss was 12 years old on November 10, 1938, when an angry mob wielding shovels stormed into her apartment in Frankfurt, Germany. She watched in fear as they smashed dishes, ripped books, and hurled furniture. They demolished the whole apartment, recalls Strauss, now 87 and living in the U.S. All over Frankfurt, crowds of Nazi supporters were setting synagogues on fire, breaking the windows of Jewish-owned businesses, and beating Jews in the streets. At the same time, similarly vicious attacks were taking place throughout Germany and parts of German-occupied Austria and Czechoslovakia. Anti-Semitism, discrimination against Jews, was common in Europe in the 1930s, but never before had it escalated into such widespread violence. By the time the riots ended, later that evening, the Nazis had set fire to nearly 300 synagogues, destroyed 7,500 businesses, killed 100 Jews, and beaten and tortured thousands of others. In the aftermath of the attacks, the shattered windows of Jewish homes and storefronts littered the streets, giving rise to the name Kristallnacht, or Night of Broken Glass. The destruction was one of the first major events of the Holocaust. German dictator Adolf Hitler and the Nazis would soon begin implementing the final solution, their plan to systematically murder all the Jews of Europe. Nazi rise to power. Before Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in 1933, Strauss lived a normal, happy life. Her parents owned a general store, and she and her younger sister had many friends. But everything changed very quickly in 1933, says Strauss. Hitler hated Jews, whom he blamed for Germany's defeat in World War I, 1914 to 1918. In 1935, he stripped German Jews of citizenship and the right to vote. Before long, Jews weren't allowed to hold certain jobs or attend public schools. Many Jewish businesses were seized. Soon, Strauss's friends stopped talking to her, and she was forced to transfer to an all-Jewish school nearly 2 hours away. In October 1938, Hitler began deporting Polish Jews living in Germany. Herschel Greenspan, a 17-year-old Polish Jew studying in France, learned that his family had been forced to leave their home. On November 7th, he went to the German embassy in Paris looking for revenge and shot the German official assigned to his case. Nazi leaders used the assassination as an excuse to launch the Kristallnacht riots, ordering their supporters to attack Jews on November 9th and 10th. In addition to destroying property, Nazis arrested 30,000 Jewish men, including Strauss's father, and sent them to concentration camps. In the weeks that followed, thousands of Jews tried to flee Germany for other countries, but many had nowhere to go. Several nations, including the U.S., had set quotas that limited the number of immigrants. Strauss and her family were trapped. Kristallnacht was only the beginning. In September 1939, Hitler set out to conquer Europe. He started by invading Poland. Within days, the continent erupted into World War II, 1939 to 1945. The war eventually pitted the Allies, including the U.S., Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, against the Axis powers, including Germany, Italy, and Japan. By 1942, German forces occupied much of Europe. As more Jews came under Germany's control, they were herded into crowded ghettos in preparation for deportations to concentration camps. In January 1942, Strauss and her family were sent to the ghetto in Riga, Latvia. She was 16. Strauss and thousands of other Jews were forced to live in a tiny, fenced-in area of the city and do back-breaking work day after day in the bitter cold. After nearly 2 years, Strauss was sent to the Kaiserwald concentration camp in Latvia, where she was separated from her family. Eventually, she was moved to Stutthof, a death camp in Poland. Strauss and the other prisoners lived in filthy huts surrounded by barbed wire. They were given little food or water. Most of the time, we just ate the grass from the ground and whatever we could find, she says. In January 1945, in the final months of the war, Allied troops were closing in on Germany. Nazi guards forced Strauss and the other prisoners to march nearly 100 miles in freezing temperatures to the Lauenburg camp in Poland, away from the approaching Allied troops. Many prisoners died along the way. Then, on March 10, 1945, Soviet forces liberated her camp. With nowhere to go, Strauss was sent to work on a Soviet farm. She was eventually forced to move back to Poland, where she met her husband, a fellow survivor. Within months, the Allies liberated the remaining camps. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, VE Day, or Victory in Europe Day. In August, the U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, bringing an end to the war in the Pacific. Never again. By the time Germany surrendered, the Nazis had killed more than 6 million European Jews, 2/3 of the continent's Jewish population, and 5 million others, including Poles, Roma, communists, and the disabled. Many had been shot and thrown into mass graves or herded into gas chambers. Others died in the camps from hunger or disease. About 1 million of the victims were children. Strauss says she can't believe that she survived. She and her husband, Hermann Taube, moved to the U.S. in 1947. They settled in Maryland, where they reunited with Strauss's father, the only member of her family to survive. Today, Strauss volunteers at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. She says it's important to share her story to ensure that the atrocities committed during the Holocaust aren't repeated. It was one of the darkest chapters in man's history, says Strauss. It should never happen again.